It's Greg Williams not remembering you can actually double cover the tight end away from probably winning another Super Bowl. And then post-2014, no one admitted it, no one said it, we all know it, they went into a rebuild. And so that's more of a long-term. It's not that you're not trying to win, but they very clearly came to the realization that they were more than just one or two pieces away. You don't trade away a Jimmy Graham or cut a Junior Galette. As much of a shithead as he was, a productive player, without looking and going, this team needs a lot, and we need to get assets. And you can see that coinciding with bringing in Jeff Ireland, because the scouting has been nothing short of an embarrassment, really, for most of the Peyton era. If you just look at our drafting overall, it's been pretty horrid. But post that, you can actually see a vision of we need to bring solid players to the roster, not just stars, not just bringing in a Jarrisburg who's never actually played in the scheme which he's designed to have success in, not to mention injuries taking away what made him special. That's neither here nor there. You don't have the core components that make a good roster. You don't have even a solid front seven. You don't have a good offensive line. You start looking down all these things post-2014 they didn't have. If we look at the roster today, there are still holes. Some of them are due to injury. Others are still due to talent. There is absolutely nothing. There is a black hole opposite Cam Jordan. But you can legitimately say if between free agency and the draft, they can fill 5 players who belong in an NFL field and can be productive, this team can be competitive. And if the things go their direction, they can be dangerous. Not a contender, not everybody's favorite. That would shock us all. But a 3-year turnaround is reasonable. And you can use the example of, if you look at the Oakland Raiders 4 years ago, 5 years ago, their cap was destroyed. They had no good players. They had nothing. They started dumping off bad contracts. They started drafting better. They started bringing in more veterans to help younger players develop. They took a long-term view. Derek Carr's injury aside, the Raiders were a very good team this year. And what I'm seeing from the Saints is everything is about 2017. You've got $30 million-ish in cap space. You have an opportunity to have a good draft that's top-heavy in positions you desperately need, being a linebacker and a pass rusher. But potential is there to have success. Now, we can't predict whether or not they're going to do it. The drafting from a talent perspective and a competency perspective, with the one exception of Stephon Anthony the last 2 years, has been so much better than it's been in the years before. It gives you hope. But the sad part is we're really only left with hope right now. But that's a hell of a lot better than being, say, I don't know, the Browns, the Niners. You have no hope. The Rams even. They're terrible. That team is awful.
Brian, let me step in for a second. First of all, Happy New Year to you, brother. Hope everything is all well on the West Coast.
Right back at you.
Secondly, man, you kind of alluded to it when you were making your opening statements there, and I kind of want to put this point out to everybody on the line tonight, and even the listeners who are listening in. The biggest question facing 2017 is how close are the Saints? And it has to be an honest answer. If it is along the lines of what you were saying, that you may be 5 players away, then in my opinion, it's time for the Saints to stop playing around, and if this is a poker table, it's time to push all your chips in the middle of the table. You got pretty much 1 good year of Drew Brees left. That he's under contract, you don't have to worry about him. Then it's a 1-year deal from that point on. But push all your chips into the middle of the table. Do whatever you have to do for a final Super Bowl run. If that means you have to, sign guys who maybe you wouldn't have signed before, do whatever you need to do. Because you only have 1 guaranteed year of Drew Brees left. And as we can see, number 9 has no drop-off. So in my opinion, the biggest question facing the Saints for 2017 is how close are they? And if that question is answered honestly, and the Saints are just a few players away, and they're really all going to turn a corner like everyone in the organization will have you believe, then it's time to push all your chips into the middle of the table. If they are not, why play around? Just turn around, start the rebuild process, draft your quarterback of the future, and just build for the future.
Well, let me throw this out there, because I'm not in disagreement with either one of you. I'm actually going to try to support your argument with adding a little caveat to it. Both Brian's making great points, but here's what's got to come out for me, and I'll bring up this name because Brian in California brought it up first. If we're going to do the whole push our whole chips into the middle type deal. Let's not do it when we're holding a pair of threes or something. Let's do it with a legitimate hand. And that comes into drafting a little smarter. And here's a problem I've had for about a year and a half now. Why did we draft Stephon Anthony for Rob Ryan? Because as an A and B gap thumper, a downhill attacker, he fits very well in a Rob Ryan, Rex Ryan system. When you basically already knew you were going to move this defense to Dennis Allen, who basically needs a Tampa 2 cover middle linebacker, which Stephon Anthony, as much as I like the guy as a person, he seems like a very nice, smart individual. That's not who he is. It's not what he played in college. It's never been his game. If we're going to do that whole method, we've got to start being a lot smarter about the free agency signings we do and the draft picks that we draft, because Stephon Anthony is not made for the team that we're at now. If you're going to do the whole Jeff Ireland 2 years of, letting him run the draft, if you're going to bring in defensive people to change, and even now bringing in O'Day to help with the special teams because somebody's best friend is really struggling as a coach and is finally getting noticed for it. Then we got to be smart about this. We can't keep going willy-nilly and just signing people and drafting people hoping it all works out. And to Ireland's credit and the Saints front office credit, Anthony aside, the past 2 years drafting have basically been spot on. Guys like Tyler Davison in the 5th round has become the prototypical one technique you want stopping the run. To find that in a 5th rounder is a great thing. P.J. Williams, before the hurt, looked very promising. I mean, Alohi Kikaha, while risky, had a very good rookie season. Those first 6 games, especially before the ankle started giving away. So it's been smart drafting. Andres Pete has become a staple of that left side, able to fill in 2 spots and do it well. I just want it to be consistent, I guess, is what I'm looking for. And if you know what's coming, don't throw a bone to somebody else. I mean, if you plan on getting rid of Joe Vitt, which I don't see happening, don't draft Joe Vitt's player. Play smart.
Well, let's just say never draft Joe Vitt's player as a general policy.
I don't know how Joe Vitt and Bill Johnson continue to have jobs through all these different defensive coordinators. There's been the 2 guys have remained the same.
Well, praise the Lord, a real media person said it. We've been saying it for 2 years now, 3 years.
Well, let me just say, and by the way, the level of intelligence and knowledge of your listeners and your co-hosts, it's phenomenal. I'm hooked in now. But let me kind of go back to a couple of points. One, the 2011 year, I still say the best team in franchise history, even more than 2009. And something happened to this team and this franchise the moment they walked off that field in San Francisco. It has not been the same. From 2006 to 2011, and I know what the years were, they had some 7-9, 8-8, but it seemed like everything they touched turned to gold. Well, then it turned to crap from 2012 till about now. But let me give you some reasons to optimism. You guys talking about going all in. I don't think this is a Super Bowl team in 2017. Do I think it's a playoff team? You make a couple right personnel decisions, I think it is. And health, obviously, being, when you're talking about the Saints and the Pelicans, I don't know if it's in the water, but health is obviously the key. If you're healthy, I think you got a chance to be a playoff team in 2017, and that's all you want. You want to get in the hunt.
I'll tell you where that's at, and then we'll just drop it. That's in Ochsner. That's in the strength and health coaches that are on those teams. We'll leave it.
It's crazy. But this franchise, when Peyton and Loomis were putting it together, they were doing it on the backs of signings like Mark Semino and Scott Fajita and Jabari Greer. They weren't going out and getting these splash guys. And God love Jarius Byrd. I think a lot of the reason his struggles were due to injury and not being in the right scheme. But it wasn't built on free agent hires or signings like that. Here's some reasons to hope. I think it took a couple bad seasons and you guys talked about it. Hey, we're not as close as we thought. It's time to shake it back up. You bring in Jeff Ireland. You redo the scouting department. And what kind of signings did we see this year? It wasn't the big, hey, let's go spend a lot of money. It's, hey, let's go get a Craig Robertson. Let's go to get a Nick Fairley. That's what the Peyton Loomis regime started at, and it's nice to see them starting to get back to that. That gives me reason for hope.
It's as you said just now, Sean. There was once upon a time when there was a such thing as a Sean Payton guy. Scott Shanley, the Sean Payton guy. Will Smith was a Sean Payton type of guy. And now, as you stated, the Saints have gotten away from that. To answer your question, Rev, it pretty much comes down to this, my brother. I think the reason why the Saints have been so awful in the draft, up until, recently, of course, is because they've been really awful in free agency. And they kind of go hand in hand. They did try to get guys like, the splash type of guys, and it didn't work. For Christ's sake, they tried to sign Champ Bailey, and then because that was an absolute disaster, they doubled up and decided to sign Brandon Browner, who was an absolute failure, and anybody that watched him in Seattle knew exactly what he was and who he was. And that was the second time they actually tried to get Browner, because the year prior, he actually picked New England over the Saints. So it basically just boils down to, it was free agency blunders that compounded on bad drafts, because you blew it in free agency, so you have to kind of double up and go back in the draft and do the same thing. Hopefully, those days are over, and we're going to return back to the days of a Sean Payton type of guy. To me, Mike Thomas is a Sean Payton type of guy. As you alluded to, Tyler Davison, Sean Payton type of guy. These are guys that had something to prove. They were more like Sean Payton when he was a player. He wasn't the greatest, wasn't the best, wasn't the fastest, didn't have the strongest arm, but he was smart as hell. He knew his assignments, and he tried to pay attention to detail was one of his most favorite things. I remember going to the Saints mini camps and OTAs and getting the chance to check out Sean Payton, who was out there with a towel around his shoulder, and he would drop the towel, and that's exactly where he wanted the wide receiver to make his cut. And if you didn't do it, you ran it again until you got it right. That attention to detail somehow, some way has escaped. But if they can get back to that, I think the Saints will.
Let me throw this out there, and I know Brian in California has another question, another statement, because I brought up Stephon Anthony. But to your point, Brian in Metairie, man, we've got to find better call signs. This is Goose and Maverick or something. This just isn't working. But to your point, and I put this stat out. Nick Underhill actually asked the question. I did the research for him, and this was as of, I think, Game 6 or Game 7. There's a consistency thing, and it's not that I think it's necessarily bad coaching. We're not seeing, as you were saying, a streak of things working in tandem together consecutively that had made the team great. And one of those things that was actually quantifiable was that earlier in the season, the Saints were scoring on their first drive, I think at around 70%, whether it be touchdown or field goals. Yet on their following possession, no scores at all, one turnover, and I think it was 6 or 7 punts. It's difficult for me to see, because keep in mind, we're talking about the best offense in the NFL, second scoring offense in the NFL. For you to reach those numbers, you've got to be doing something well. Yet in that can still have some underlying problems. And to your point that you're saying, I think it's kind of permeated into more than just draft and free agency, which those two things hopefully look like they're getting fixed. It's on the field, too. There's some discrepancies that we're not used to seeing. I remember a time in the early Sean Payton days where we were the best 2-minute offense in the NFL. Everybody said it. Everybody talked about it. Even though the Saints weren't the darling childs like the Aaron Rodgers or the Bradys, everybody gave respect to Drew Brees and Sean Payton and paid homage to them for what they were able to do. We used to lead the league in initial drives and touchdowns and things like that. And now we seem to be able, one drive is a 90-yard drive and it's fireworks, bang, and then the next drive is 3 straight pass plays and out. There's a consistency lacking there that I think that's something else that has to be found the answer. And like I said, I don't really think it comes down to the coaching staff is no longer able to do what they were able to do. Whatever the reasoning is, we got to figure out what it was. But I haven't forgot you, Brian in California. Shoot us what you got.
Just to speak real quick to the kind of the Stephon Anthony question you posed earlier. And obviously not based on sources. We're just kind of looking at the player, looking at what he was in college, and then obviously what he's been in the pros. I think he was a case, and obviously erroneously, but I think he was a case of Peyton trying to hedge his bets. Either, because the physical attributes are there, without question. It's either he can adapt and become the type of middle linebacker they want him to be, or he changes things up and you can move him over to the strong side because he was a good pass rusher in college. He was a good blitzer. He had a lot of the attributes that you'd want to see that. And we saw them attempt that change in the offseason this year. It didn't work. But I think that was what the vision was, is plan B was move him to strong side, and it just didn't work out. But I think that was where the vision was for the player from a schematic standpoint, from an ability standpoint.
Well, yeah.